On the Common Link Theory, CLT, by Alhomoudi, Mcgill University, 2006. Conclusion. One of the most important pillars upon which Western historiography of early Islamic law rests is the idea that the corpus of prophetic tradition is nothing short of a fabricated mass. This central premise in turn rests upon several theories, the cornerstone of which is the CLT, the Common Link Theory. By clearly demonstrating the faultiness of this theory, reverberations become apparent within Schachtians' broader discourse on Islamic law. We are no longer safe in assuming that the entirety of the Sunnah is inauthentic, or in ignoring the terminology and methodology of Muslim scholarship. In their methodological and critical formulations, muhaddiths recognized only about 1% of over 700,000 traditions as being historically authentic. To discount this accomplishment is entirely premature without substantially addressing how traditionists defined authenticity. The fact of the matter remains that it was the modern scholar's misapprehension of how the critical study of Hadith was applied and conducted that led to serious problems in understanding not only the early history of Hadith, but how Islamic law was formed. The tendency of approaching Hadith with extreme skepticism was inaugurated by Ignaz Goldziher, and maintained by numerous other Orientalists, although Schacht was the first to articulate an argument using textual evidence. Subsequently, Schacht's scholarship established the paradigm for researching on Islamic law, provoking an array of proponents and opponents. However, Schacht's interpreters understood his articulation only partially, for an evolution of thinking exists in his work, which upon inspection and scrutiny fails to support his assumptions with evidence. While Schacht's proponents seek to develop his work in three different ways, their potential is framed and limited by their acceptance of his theory. The first way is represented by Cook, the second by Juynboll, and the third by Motzki. Both Cook and Juynboll accept the CLT without question, while Motzki criticized the theory and had enough evidence not only to disprove it, but to destroy it altogether. Yet he did not, opting instead to modify and preserve it. His reluctance to deal Schacht a coup de grace was an act of preserving a certain tradition, perhaps out of loyalty, but the evidence at his disposal does not justify his clemency. Be that as it may, subsequent work based on any of these approaches continues to rest upon shaky foundations. Opposing arguments represent a spectrum, ranging from the extremely broad on one hand to the intently specific on the other. The former tendency is characterized by a lack of concern for the particular elements of Schacht's argument about Hadith, while the other approach tends to focus upon minute details, losing sight of their relation to Schacht's argument more generally. None of these critics has adequately addressed the milestone of Schacht's work, namely the CLT. However, when this theory was given some consideration, a number of insightful criticisms by Coulson and Azami were indeed proffered. Analysis of this theory reveals that it is not supported by irregular and insufficient examples of Hadith, which belie unfamiliarity on the part of Schacht with works on Hadith terminology. These very examples are labelled by muhaddiths as embodying irregularities, although Schacht uses them as actual representatives of a standard body of Hadith. This monumental failure to ground the theory in representative, strong, and quantitatively sufficient evidence has yielded a conclusion, a theory whose constitution is little more than conjecture. Although Juynboll comprehends the significance of the CLT to Schacht's critique of prophetic tradition, he applies it with his own work incorrectly, demonstrating a lack of familiarity with Rijal works. If he was aware of this literature and its implications, he would have recognized that the evidence he adduced actually works against his own argument. Indeed, if Juynboll or Schacht had interpreted their evidence correctly, this would have facilitated an accurate reinterpretation that is more in line with the discourse and critique of the muhaddiths. When compared with the muhaddiths' corollary of the CL, i.e. tafarrud, Schacht's theory appears obviously flawed. Its problems are primarily related to the misunderstanding and misapplication of terminology, such as the various distinct types of fard. Additionally, Schacht's other problems reflect a lack of familiarity with primary sources. This highlights the need for Western scholars to engage Hadith literature more directly and access more accurate conceptual tools for its study. The study of Hadith has existed amongst traditionists within particular historical boundaries, with its own trajectory. It has always been dealt with as a separate field of scholarship, which uniquely trained practitioners, its own methodology, and a vast array of literature. Western scholarship could profit enormously from a more open dialogue with the muhaddiths. more specifically reorienting the Western paradigm of research to consider Hadith terminology, biographical literature and traditionist methodology, and isnad analysis, which would enrich it greatly. The importance of this reorientation cannot be overemphasized, not only intrinsically but for its potential effects on deconstructing the present narrative of early legal history, as well as reproducing a more cogent account of this important foundational period. End of thesis. Stay tuned for the appendices and many more parts.